Robert Scheer is with us now, longtime journalist, editor of the political website Truthdig. He's author of a number of books. His forthcoming one is called The Great American Stickup: Greedy Bankers and the Politicians Who Love Them. His latest article on Truthdig is Perp Walks Instead of Bonuses. He joins us from San Francisco. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Robert.
Hi,
Perp walks?
Yes. I mean, first of all, let me say the bonuses, I think it's an important glimpse into the cesspool that is Wall Street, but it's a sideshow. You know, and I know it's confusing millions, billions, trillions. But the real scandal is the money. AIG is basically a shell game at this point. And they're passing the money through AIG to the big banks, the former stockbrokers, and so forth. Goldman Sachs got the biggest amount, $12.5 billion. The head of AIG was on the board of directors and the head of the audit committee for Goldman Sachs for 5 years. The Treasury Secretary that put this deal together, Paulson, under Bush, was the head, was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. The guy who administered the TARP fund was a vice president at Goldman Sachs. The Democrat who made all of this deregulation possible, Robert Rubin, when he was Secretary of Treasury, and then Lawrence Summers, who followed him, Rubin had been the head of Goldman Sachs, and they pushed through the basic deregulation that allowed these banks to become too big to allow to fail. So while I think it's a terrific teaching moment to see how excessive the pay is for people who basically brought the world economy to its knees, which are these so-called executives, and I think there is a real phony in that they had to be given these bonuses for retention. Andrew Cuomo, in his letter to Barney Frank, pointed out that the 11 of the top people who got these bonuses have already left the firm. So that really doesn't hold water. But I think the real scandal here is that we're supposed to own 80% of AIG, and maybe the Fed and the Treasury are in on it, but basically it's being used as a shell to pass on money to these banks, Goldman Sachs being the leading one, and that should be examined, because I think that is really a criminal waste of our money.
Juan, I wanted to ask you something. In your latest column in the New York Daily News, you were specifically writing about UBS, the Swiss bank that got, what, $5 billion bailout from AIG?
Right. Yeah, I think in the same vein as Bob Scheer is talking about, yes, UBS got $5 billion last fall from AIG. And interestingly, Bob, I'm sure you're aware, UBS was at that very moment involved in a federal case in Florida, charges that it was had conspired with Americans who held secret accounts at UBS in Switzerland to evade federal taxes. Just a month ago, it agreed to pay $780 million in fines to the U.S. government, but is still resisting releasing the names of these 50,000 Americans who were evading taxes with the help of UBS. So now you have the UBS getting bailout money, $5 billion through AIG, and then paying the federal government $780 million in fines for tax evasion. It's astounding that this continues to happen, and I think you've correctly pointed out that the big scandal here is the amount of money that AIG is basically being used as a pass-through for all of these other banks.
Oh, there's no question about it. And you should point out that UBS, one of the officers of UBS is Phil Gramm, who was the Republican head of the Senate Finance Committee, who pushed through the deregulation legislation, the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, the Financial Service Modernization Act, which allowed this to happen, which made these crimes legal. And I mean, these people have no shame. This guy is an officer of a foreign company that we American taxpayers are paying for having caused all of the suffering. That is what I find astounding about this. First of all, I think this whole argument that they're too big to fail is utter nonsense. That's why we have bankruptcy courts. If you can't pay your bill, you go through bankruptcy court, there's a resolution of it. There's absolutely no reason why AIG couldn't have gone the way of Lehman. It didn't go the way of Lehman because the head of Goldman Sachs was in on the meeting with Timothy Geithner, who was then head of the New York Federal Reserve, when they decided to save AIG hours after Lehman was allowed to go down the tubes. Why? Because Goldman Goldman Sachs had $20 billion insured by AIG. And the CEO of Goldman Sachs was in on that meeting, the only CEO. This is one of the great financial scandals of American history. I don't know why that's not being investigated. I think Timothy Geithner should be asked a lot of tough questions. I think he should be asked to resign, frankly, by the president, because he's up to his eyeballs in this.
Bob, one of the other points that Liddy made in the congressional hearings yesterday was that the reason they had to pay these retention bonuses is because the derivatives deals that the bankers that the insurers at AIG were involved in were so complex that if these people left, it would be very difficult to be able to unravel them. And part of the problem, isn't it, that these derivative deals, precisely because they are so opaque and so complex and nobody knows what they are, create enormous risk for not only the banks involved, but obviously it turns out for the taxpayers in general. Wouldn't some kind of way to actually publicize what the deals that were paid off were be one way of getting to the bottom of how this crisis occurred?
Of course, but first of all, you don't have to have the cooperation of criminals, or potential criminals. If that's Bernie Madoff, is going to cooperate, and other top officers of his operation. The argument that somehow we have to give these people millions of dollars in order to get them to unravel a crime is utter nonsense. The other thing is there was nothing really very complex about the insurance deal. It was a scam. What was happening is that we were doing these credit swaps, which grew because of deregulation. They packaged all these things together that shouldn't have been packaged together. And the way to sell them for a high price was to get a respected insurance company, AIG, which had been in traditional regulated insurance business. Let's use the AAA rating. Let's use their great reputation. These shysters in London who are getting most of these bonuses were the ones who came up with the scam. And we'll put the sticker of approval of AIG insurance, even though it's not backed by any money, even though they're allowed to leverage up the gazoos, again, because of deregulation. But that's really what AIG had to do with it. You have this toxic bundle of securities that you're trying to sell. You say, oh, don't worry about it. We got AIG backing it. And in back of their mind is the government won't let AIG go down the tubes. And I don't have any compunction at all about saying let Goldman Sachs, let Citi, let Bank of America go down the tubes, because that's what bankruptcy court is about. And you can take the different pieces, you can save the depositors, you can save the homeowners. They've not been wanting to do that anyway. We should have started the whole resolution of this crisis by saying, let's have a freeze on foreclosures. Let's save the people who are being thrown out of their homes. That's the way to put stability. There's $75 billion for the whole mortgage program to save all of these tens of millions of people who are at risk, and yet we had a number more than twice as much going to AIG to help out these bankers. So I think there are tough questions to be asked. I know the Obama administration is only less than 2 months old, but Timothy Geithner was head of the Federal Reserve in New York. He should not have been given the Treasury Secretary position, and he is the one that really should be on the spot at this time.
And Larry Summers, Bob Scheer?
Oh, Larry Summers should not be in government at all. Larry Summers was the guy who pushed through. He was, as was Timothy Geithner, Robert Rubin's protege, but he took over at Treasury after Rubin, and he's the one who pushed through and got Clinton to sign the Financial Services Modernization Act and the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. The language of the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, you can download it from Truthdig or other places on the Internet, says very clearly in Titles 3 and 4 that none of these new derivatives, which is the toxic stuff now, would be subject to any pre-existing regulation or government agency. That's the specific language of Title 3 and 4, which Lawrence Summers pushed through along with Phil Gramm, who's now an officer of UBS. That's what opened the gates for this corruption. That's what has caused people to lose the value of their 401ks and to lose their homes. So, yes, Summers should be being questioned. He shouldn't be in the government. And I think Timothy Geithner, it's time for him to leave as well.